Hi everyone and welcome again. My name's Natalie and I have curated and produced this film fundraising series. Just to give a bit of background information, I am a theatre producer mainly, and I've worked for about 2 years professionally since I graduated, mainly working for other organisations, at the same time hustling to start building up an independent producing portfolio myself. At the start of this year in 2020, I set myself a goal of like a new year goal and like do a new challenge, and decided I want to give it a go in making a film. And I like a lot of people, I went into the Facebook groups to apply for loads of jobs, etc. Didn't quite get anywhere, but luckily some filmmakers who are also actually helping out on this call right now from the Ace Effect, Asad and Rakesh, they took a punt on me and gave me their script, and it went from there. And luckily, coming from a subsidised theatre background, we're quite used to applying for grants. We're quite used to asking people for money in order to make things happen. So I've done some of that in order to get us to this stage. And I am quite passionate about ensuring other people also know sort of the ways to how to find money and ensure that it's a career that is accessible for people. So that's why I've kind of came up with this idea. But I also thought I'd mention that if you're hoping to come to this series of webinar knowing a magic formula by the end of it, I can tell you there probably isn't a magic formula by the end of it. I think it's intended that after today we have some one-to-one discussions with an art supporter, an executive producer, and someone from a local council who approves grants. I think most of us will tell you that it's coming from a lot of hard work, a lot of planting the seeds, and a lot of relationship building. And this series is intended to give you that insight and hear directly from the other side of the table. So yeah, I think that's just to give you an idea. And yes, and if you want to sign up for the next couple of days, please do. All the information is on the BFI Network website. But yeah, I think that's enough about me. I will hand over to the others to introduce themselves. Helen, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. So I'm a producer and a writer, and I've made 2 feature films, one called Chubby Funny, one called Say Your Prayers. And I've got a production company called Erebus Pictures, and we've got a slate of quite a few films and TV shows.
Great. And so sorry, I completely forgot. If you've got any questions for us and the panelists, make sure you use the Q&A function at the bottom to ask those questions rather than the chat, because there's so many lovely people introducing themselves, it will get lost. So make sure you post it in the Q&A box down in the bottom if you have a question. Yes, if that's okay. Yeah, and we'll endeavour to get through as many as we can. So shall we go to Paul next?
Hi, I'm Paul Hillier. I do production insurance, have done for 15 years or so lots of shorts, lots of features, probably over 100 shorts, but I'm a massive film fan first, love supporting the industry. I'm hoping to make my first short film probably next year now, but yeah, basically a slightly curveball choice on the panel, but it's to work with you and help on insurances and shorts and the networks and stuff. So that's me really.
Shall we go to Lucy next then?
Yeah, hi. So I'm Lucy. I'm a producer. I'm based in the regions. I'm up in Yorkshire at the moment. I've produced, I think, 4 funded short films at the moment, with another one that was due to shoot in October, but things being the way they are, we decided to push that until next year. I've got a background of working kind of in development and production at various companies, so I have a kind of good overview of how projects come together at different stages. So hopefully I have some useful information for people today.
Great. Yeah, so let's get started. The first sort of like question I think is that I also wanted to know from you guys is when you've come across a really brilliant idea, whether it's a short film, a feature film, or just a seed idea, and you decided, yes, I'm gonna go with it finally. Where does the topic of like fundraising start coming through into your head? Where does that journey start? Maybe Lucy, do you want to go first and talk about your experience on that?
Yeah, I think, as probably will be the case with quite a few of these answers, it's a bit of a how long is a piece of string kind of answer. So there's so many different factors that come into it before I start thinking about sort of fundraising, whether I've worked with the talent before, if the kind of talent have a track record, what the story is, what stage that story's at. So for instance, I've kind of vowed to not take on any more short films, but if one comes along from a really established talent that hasn't made a feature yet, that has interest from a lot of places, then I'm probably going to find it hard to say no. Whereas, you know, if it's a relatively new talent who hasn't made something before, maybe doesn't already have a relationship with funders, that's going to be quite an early decision as to whether I even sort of have much of a conversation with that talent, really. But if it's a talent that I've been working with before, it depends on the project idea, sort of what stage it is, if it's television, if it's film, if it's a short, if it can be done on a micro budget, if it could be done sort of just getting some friends together on a day to kind of do some shooting with the resource we have. So it kind of influences a lot of decisions, and it's something I think about early on as to whether it needs to be financed. It's a project that needs money. And if it does need money, how realistic that kind of fundraising process is going to be, if that answers your question.
Yeah, I guess, if it's okay to ask a follow-up, how do you assess sort of like how financeable is a project? Like, as a producer, what is in your head? How do you figure that out?
I guess with shorts, because I imagine that might be the kind of thing that people are looking at who are joining this webinar today. Generally, my first kind of question is, does that talent have a relationship with somewhere like the BFI? Are the BFI interested in them? Are BBC interested in them? And then with features, is it an art house project or commercial? If it's art house, again, does the talent have a lot of you know, are they known in the industry? Do people already like them? Because it's so talent-led when it comes to kind of independent dramas. Whereas commercially, I think, you know, if you pair the right director with the right script, then it's a different avenue of fundraising, so different considerations, I think.
Of course, yeah, absolutely. Helen, do you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so right what Lucy's saying about it being very
as in, maybe start with like what stage? Yeah.
Oh, sorry. What stage do I look for finance? So it depends. I mean, for shorts, when we were doing shorts, it tended to be, is this something, like you say, if the filmmakers are known, then is it worth approaching a Film 4 or BBC or BFI and doing it that way? And if not, then we would try and make sure the budget was so small and it was a kind of like a one-day thing that we could do that way. And now with features, again, it's thinking about where you are in your career too, because the first feature that I made, it was accepting that we weren't going to be having finance conversations until we had so much in place, until we'd perfected the script, until we'd got HODs, until we'd got cast. Like we kind of had to assemble the full package before we could try and find the money, because we knew that we weren't going to get interest from any of the development financiers and stuff. And so now it's a question of when we get a project or when we come up with an idea, it's exactly that. It's thinking, where do we place it? And if it's a project where the writer is already has some excitement about what they're doing because they've done some successful shorts, and the director too, then we can say, okay, well, actually all we need is a 2-page treatment, and then we'll go to finance, because we'll try and get the whole development process financed. If it's somebody that's completely new but we really believe in them, then maybe we work on the script on spec. If it's commercial, then we think about where we find commercial finance for developing the script. So it depends on where we think that project's going to sit. And most of the time now, we look at finance as almost the first thing. and we think about whether we can get that partner on board from the get-go, because that makes more sense for us, and it means that you're more likely to get the production funding later down the line. But when starting out, both the features that I did, there was no development finance, and it was all about getting the projects together, the packages together, and then thinking about where to find the money.
Of course, yeah, no, that, oh, Paul has his hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to say, obviously, I haven't got anywhere near the same experience as Lucy and Helen, but I think having ensured so many shorts in the past, a lot of them have been on Creative England slates and Screen South and Northern Ireland Screen and various things like that. I suppose when I knew I'd like to have made my first short, I almost sort of assumed that the finance would come together quickly. It'd be something that would just happen like that, because it didn't seem a very big budget when it was compared to features. But obviously, knowing what I know now, and the script came to me, and I was able to reach out to lots of producer friends and ask them if they, for feedback and if it was worth doing, and they all said yes. And then I started working with the other producer on it, and I suppose then the idea of, once the budget, we knew the producer's also a line producer, so she put the budget together. And once we knew roughly what figures we were looking at, I think then I realised how hard it was going to be to get the stuff together and start talking about favours and how to pull some finances in and sort of support in kind almost. So
I think
it's an interesting journey. Sorry, Helen.
No, sorry. I think in a way, like it's almost easier to finance a feature than a short, which I know doesn't make sense because the amounts are so different. But actually, if you think about a feature, you are trying to make a product that you can sell, and so for investors, it's about the fact that you have this product that can make their money back. Whereas with a short, it's so rare that, I've got a friend who has a short that has actually made her some money because it was so successful, but that's sort of 1 in a million. So really, when you're funding a short, you're looking for someone who's investing in you and the writer and the director for the long haul, or is doing some sort of benevolent act, or wants to get involved because it's their first foray into film too. But you're selling very different things in order to get your finance, which is why I think often you are either choosing between doing a kind of Duplass Brothers tiny shoot mobile phone one day, or if you want bigger money, you've got to find a way to appeal to that, to the funding bodies, which is hard if it's your debut, like almost impossible, unless you're coming from, you're a playwright or you've come from another arena, and you're switching roles.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's really, really insightful. I guess it might be interesting for me to share a little bit about like where I'm coming at, I guess. So I'm really, really lucky enough that I worked in a development assistant role in a London theatre. In theatre, the word development is entirely different from film. So it means that I'm the fundraising assistant of a charity. That means I look after their individual giving Patreon scheme. I write loads of funding applications on behalf of the charity, the theatre, to ensure it survives. And one thing I've been taught by my manager when I first started my role is that on average it takes 18 months for a gift to come in, a donation, and obviously that's more talking about on a short film where like you're not expecting to make any money. So in other words, you're looking for sort of that kind of philanthropic support, someone to kind of like give you that gift to invest in you for the first time for you to make something. So it takes a lot of building relationships, a lot of chatting to them, inviting them to see your work, or if you have other things that are going on, before making that ask, will you give me some money to make my film or my project? I guess thought I'd share that's where I'm coming at it. And that's when I guess usually for me, if at this level, if a filmmaker comes to me with a project, what I'm thinking is like, do they have that network? How long does it take to develop those networks? Or obviously with applications to apply to both BFI and other Croydon Council or other local funds, it takes a long turnaround, and the success rate, even if you're really good, sometimes it's not about you, it's just that they just don't have enough funds that time. And so I those are the questions I ask. How much time do we have to kind of like put into applications and things like that? Yeah.
It's definitely a long process, and I think what Paul was saying about how he assumed that it would be like the quick bit, but it's actually the hardest bit. And I think realistically in filmmaking, and I feel like this all the time, like the jackpot moment for me is when you know that you've got the money and you can make it. And actually there are challenges in production, in post, there's creative challenges, there's casting nightmares, there's, you know, there's all sorts of things, and then there's releasing a film and all of that. But actually the very, very, very hardest bit is finding the money. And I think we don't talk about that much, because we often just like to focus on the fun creative stuff and talk about story or whatever, but you're not going to be able to put stories on the screen if you can't finance them. And this is why, you know, producers are so integral, because that's a really core part of your role, and finding money is hard, and it is really about relationships, and you have to be really good at nurturing those, at knowing how to deal with them. You know, if you're asking people with organizations to a degree, but that's not the person's money themselves, but if you're dealing with like equity financiers or people doing in-kind support or whatever, you know, you've got to know how to handle that and make them feel like they've made the right decision every step of the way, keep them involved, give them updates. You know, you can't just take their money and then not email them for 7 months or whatever. Like, you have to make sure that they are part of that process. And there's a lot of work actually that goes into just tending relationships, which is something to bear in mind, because if you don't maintain those, or if you hear stories about people who really tarnish their relationships and their reputation because they don't handle those things properly. And I think it's something that's so important if you want to produce, especially, but, you know, if you're in any sort of circumstance where you want to raise money, thinking about how best to manage those relationships should be something you put time and effort into.
I think, like Helen just said, I think timing is a really key thing. I think because obviously with the network I've built up, I almost don't want to ask certain people certain things. I think it almost feels like you get one chance to ask the right person, the right project maybe. And I think that's why I've struggled a little bit with knowing I know so many people here that could probably help. Some have done it already, but others I'm just a little bit wary of doing it. And I think it's just knowing, you know, who to contact, when, and what to ask for, and that sort of thing on the finance side.
Yeah, and there's no handbook for it as well, which is so tough. Like, a lot of it is asking advice from people that have done it before. Like, I would never have known what to do if I'd not spoken to lots of sort of mentor figures in the beginning. And even going to film school or reading books, I don't think that it really can convey that process to you until you're going through it. And you will make mistakes and you will feel a bit lost, but ultimately you've got to be able to just have that confidence to knock on doors in the right way, know when to chase, know when, you know, all of that kind of stuff, which is asking a lot of questions, I think, and learning as you go.
Yeah, absolutely. Paul, do you want to touch on a little bit more about how did you build your network and how, like, kind of you build those relationships with in-kind support? Because I know you're quite experienced with that. Is that okay to ask you to share a bit of that to everyone listening?
I think, like I say, I come from an insurance background. That's my day job. You know, I insure lots of feature films and high-end TV dramas and shorts, and I love that world. I think knowing who I know now, and, you know, working with Lucy and Helen and those other great producers, knowing what I know now, I'd love to have been in production, you know, been a producer, gone to film school, been a runner, whatever. And I think the last 10, 15 years has all been about just sort of trying to build a network and basically contact companies and people, and just, it's not always about, you know, what they can do for you. I think it's what you can do for other people. And I think it's not always obvious when you contact someone. It's about just sort of listening and sharing and just putting people together, and just the more people you know, I think the more problems you can solve, and whether that's on a production level or insurance or legal or, you know, finance or anything really. I think because of this network I built up, I try and use it just to benefit anybody I see, and then, you know, think about putting people together and try, you know, set up this lunch club thing where people come along every other month in Soho to meet some more people. And just, I think, like I said, the more people you know and the more people you share with and the more people you listen to and get knowledge from other parts of the industry, the more it benefits you indirectly, but I think other people get from it rather than you. And I think that pays itself back eventually. I think if you go and sort of, you know, tap people up and ask for this and ask for money and ask for advice all the time, I think it always feels like a bit you're taking a bit, whereas I think the more you give, the more you end up getting back.
Absolutely. I guess I also share a little bit that my first short film that I made is currently in post-production. We've had some in-kind support from 3 theatres in London. So we've managed to borrow some props from the Young Vic Theatre, and one of my kind of a good theatre that I have good relationship with, Battersea Arts Centre, gave us some office space to work on stuff once we were in pre-production, and a lovely theatre called the Bush Theatre in Shepherd's Bush gave us to let us use their venue and some of their resources for free as well. Just to give you guys a bit of insight of how I got there. So like a lot of people, when you're starting out, you apply for loads and loads of jobs just to pay your bills, and especially if you want to work in the creative industry. When I moved to London, when I knew that I wanted to work in theatre or anything in creative, I like everyone, I did that, and I have been rejected by many people on jobs, even after an interview, etc. But it was quite it's not easy, but I always still try and maintain that relationship. So okay, like it's really hard, and when you get that thank you but no email, but you still have to smile and you still have to be so polite on the email saying I want to maintain a relationship with you, and etc. And it feels like it sometimes feels like you're begging, and as well, I did also feel like that in the start of my career, and I'm still starting, but some of those venues were places that I've applied for jobs and I didn't get the job, but I continued that. I was like, I continued sending them emails updating, oh, I'm still a producer, I'm still doing work, come see my work, and most of the time you won't get a response, but sometimes you will, and they gradually, and as long as you do it in not in a very polite way. I always end emails saying like, I'll completely understand if you don't have the time, but it would be great if you do, and just make people feel like it's not obligatory to respond to you. I found that quite a good way of building those relationships and kind of cracking those things that you didn't think you could, cracking those doors that you didn't think you could crack. So that's how I did it. Lucy, did you have anything you wanted to add on that?
No, just to echo what these guys have said about kind of knowing when to utilise the relationships you've built up, and maybe when to let them sort of boil a little longer. I totally get what Paul said about not necessarily wanting to go to certain people to ask them for something because it feels like you're taking. So I think, yeah, being mindful of that if you are in a position where you're like, okay, we're going to have to start asking favours, and just knowing that you're kind of being respectful to people, and that if you are going to them, you're going to them because you value their expertise and their knowledge. Like, I think ultimately people want to be helpful, and it makes people feel quite good about themselves if you can say, you're really good at this, I'd love to just find out like 2 minutes of the most basic stuff you know about it. And like, it's quite reassuring. Like, I know I've done it before. I've like, right, I need a confidence boost, so I'm just going to talk to somebody about something I know about that might be helpful to them, because it boosts my ego and makes me feel good. Other people probably have the same thing as well. So yeah, just being mindful of what you're asking of people and what they might be getting out of that, whether it is just like a reprieve from something they're struggling with to talk about something that they know really well, is sometimes all they want.
And also, like, if you're going into film, then this is a long game, right? You know, you're thinking about this is decades worth of career, and it's not going to be that everybody is the right fit for every project. And so thinking that, yes, I might have got 20 no's on this thing, but now I have that line of communication, and maybe on the next thing, or the thing after that, or the thing after that, it will be right. And as you get more experienced, you'll learn what certain investors or companies are looking for, and then you'll know, actually, like, I've got this horror, I'm not going to send it to this company because they don't care, and I'm not going to send it to this place, but this place will love it. And you'll start to understand everybody's preferences and tastes, and you know, what the market looks like and all that sort of stuff. But that is the process you have to go through, and you have to get the rejections, and you have to just learn who is going to be the right person to go to and spark up relationships. So I think even if you get lots of rejections, don't feel like that's a bad thing or some sort of failure, because it's really not. It's still most, even successful producers and stuff, it's still going to be probably 90% of the emails they get. So
when the script was first sort of presented or first came up, I don't think I'm a creative person. I don't think I'm that good at, you know, the just telling you what's a good script and what's not. I know what I like, but I don't know if that's what everyone likes. And I think what was great for me having the network is when I had this first draft of the script, sending out to 10, 15 people, like heads of production at great companies and ex-development producers and just people that I really respected what they did and what they make, and just said, look, to be honest, is it worth spending time with? What do I need to, you know, what do we need to do with it? How do we improve it? And we got some really great feedback from some, you know, fantastic people in the industry. And I think that then started things off and we got it into a really good shape. And then I went to the, you know, the post house friend and a camera guy friend and a lighting friend, and you then start getting favors in kind and really start building up a, you know, a budget towards what you know, what your deficit is. But I think it's just that having those people that you look on as people you really respect, but people that are friends now as well as clients and as well as associates, and just being able to ask and saying, look, like Lucy and Helen said, you know, I really respect you. I'd love your input on this, and what do you think? And I think they like to be consulted and like the fact that you respect their opinion, I think. So that was really useful in terms of the script stage.
Definitely, yeah. Do any of you want to describe a journey from like sort of starting the fundraising process to kind of finishing a fundraising process, whether it's investment or actually kind of like donations for a short? Like, do any of you want to describe that journey a little bit to the people listening?
I'm only about halfway along that. So not the best person to answer that one.
I mean, it might be useful if I can talk about the last short that I did, because I think that had quite an interesting journey, or it covered a lot of areas that I think people trying to put shorts together might be interested in. So it's a short film called Pop, that was funded through the BFI, which, you know, we'd already spoke to them. They liked the sound of it, so they wanted to invest in it. However, it was quite an ambitious short, so their kind of budget limit of 15,000, I think it was, just wasn't going to cut it. So we knew we were going to need to raise additional finance. And I think from the point of us kind of being told that we had the BFI funding through to actually shooting was about 1.5 years of trying to raise extra finance, which was, you know, at first we had another potential partner who was really interested when we'd applied to the BFI, who had all but said that they would give us the money, which is why BFI give us the money, and they just totally dropped out within like a week of us getting the okay from the BFI. So where our money was going to come from was suddenly gone, which is a thing that happens a lot, like especially when you get features, money just falls away. So we then had to kind of retrofit the money we needed from different places, and we tried so many places. We were going to kind of different charities, different funds, local councils. We got sort of dribs and drabs from different places. But then ultimately we had to make the decision that we were going to crowdfund. And we only made that decision because we had to end up shooting on a certain date. So we had quite a known actor in the film who was only available on these specific dates last October. So it was either now or never. So we made the decision that we were going to crowdfund the film, but we were going to crowdfund after we'd made it. So that then brought up a whole other issue. Well, how do we cash flow the film until we've crowdfunded it? So that was another load of conversations of trying to find money and saying, but you'll get it back like straight away, I promise. I know a lot of people crowdfund beforehand, which, you know, is obviously a safer bet. You know how much money you've got to play with. We were taking a risk, but because of the people involved in that film and having quite a named cast member, we were kind of confident that we would be able to crowdfund it after the fact. So we were able to find the money to cash flow it. I think it ended up being about £6,000 to cash flow in the end. We did the crowdfunder, which was successful, and through the crowdfunder and the kind of network we built making the film, we actually found somebody who put an extra £5,000 towards it. So we ended up with a higher budget than we'd initially planned. So we kind of covered all bases when it comes to funding short films on that one. It was a very strange process, but hopefully it kind of goes to show that these things change and develop. Like whatever you set out to do isn't always what you end up doing, and things that you maybe took for granted that you would get and that are there aren't always there. So having a backup and that network of being able to try and talk to people, knowing what it is that you have on offer and how you're going to kind of give people what they want for the money that they're giving to your film is really, really important to ensuring that you get the finance that you need for it. I hope that was useful.
Great. Yeah, no, that absolutely is. And it definitely shows to people that there is no sort of like one way of going about things. It might be a good chance to talk about so how do you sort of like keep these relationships and communicate to all your partners, stakeholders, funders, donors, investors when things don't go to plan? Should we, like, it might be a good time to touch on that. Does anyone want to start on that?
I mean, yeah, I think it's a mixture of you have to be honest, but you have to also be very optimistic and positive, because ultimately making a film is a risk. And most people that are putting money in, if they're individuals anyway, like it's their sort of their 5% risk money. They know that it's not necessarily going to pay back. They'd just be happy to see half it come back or something. But you have to manage expectations, but also keep spirits up constantly. And it's quite a fine tightrope to walk. But I think, the last film that we did, I think we had 10 investors in the end. It was like a lot of different investors, different types of money, some organizations, someone in France, someone in Belgium, some equity, it was some tax credit. It was a real sort of mishmash. And the way that I kept on top of it was by just being very rigorous about emailing everybody every day when we were shooting. So, you have a big group of people that that at the end of the day, you're going to send them the progress reports, you're going to send them some pictures, perhaps you're going to tell them what's happened. And we had a lot of nightmares on that shoot. I mean, we were filming in Yorkshire during The Beast from the East, and there was not meant to be snow in this film. And there was like 12 days of the shoot with snowstorms. So, trying to just like explain when there are problems, we ate through our contingency incredibly quickly because of that weather. So explaining that, but explaining what you're doing to make sure that that's not a problem down the line, focusing on the positives, focusing on what's going well as being honest. It's like the compliment sandwich, but like the good news sandwich, isn't it? And I think you shouldn't and you can't hide things, because it will come and bite you. You have to be honest about what's going on, but you have to find the positive spin. And sometimes it's really hard as well, because films don't necessarily always live up to your expectations or turn out as you planned, and they don't always get into the festival you want them to get into, and that's really difficult. But it is the journey and the experience that people sign up for. Like, unless they're completely green to investing and you're not telling them how it works, like, they know that it's a leap of faith and it's a creative endeavor, and it's something where you can't predict what's going to happen. So I think it's just about making the experience as enjoyable for them as possible. And, that's what I'm always quite liberal when it comes to things like credits or what they can say they're involved in, and like including investors sometimes in the press, if they're like related to an area. On a film I had recently, the place that they lived was quite interested in promoting the film. So we did quite a lot of radio interviews together, like trying to make sure that they're getting a lot back other than just the money, that the experience for them is really fun and important, because that's a huge part of why people get involved too. Are we doing the Q&A questions at the end or as we go?
I think, yeah, I was gonna say maybe we should start thinking of like answering some of them, if the panel is happy about that. I saw a question about who to basically, they want some more specific answers on who to build relationships with. I thought it might be easier I talk a little bit about that and then see who can answer what questions, and then we can go from there. So the way I went about it, there was a question from Rich about who exactly do I build relationships with. When I went through every single theatre in London, I went to their support us page. They recognize people on there that have donated money to the theatre, and then I Google them, and then I find their website, I find where they work, and then I send out cold emails. That's how I did it when I started. That was mainly for theatre projects, but I think you can apply that to film. I think it's some of those things that I touch on hopefully feels transferable, and it is a very, very long process. I'm not sure whether that's the most effective process, but that's sort of like some of the things I thought I'd share I've done before. And maybe like 30 emails I sent out, one would get back to me, but because that's how I knew those people had money, if they already donate to a theatre, and they're interested in the arts, be it theatre or film. So that's the way I went about it. Yeah, panelists, do you have any questions you see in the Q&A that you thought you wanted to answer?
Well, Richard, talking about like the BFI specifically and stuff, I mean, I think realistically, the organisations like Film 4, BBC, BFI, it's not often as simple as a cold email from experience. Like I found that I didn't really get into that sphere until I'd actually already made a feature. And then at that point, people started to recognise me as a producer. And then often, again, that relationship was through the director or the writer that I was working with, or when I was working as a writer through schemes like iFeatures. And I think often the way to get money, especially for shorts, is through, you go through the network applications. It's a lot more about applications than it is about relationship with an individual. And as time goes on and you have worked with those organisations, then it might become a bit more individual. But it's still a process, because it's an organisation and it's public money and all that kind of thing. Whereas with other companies that are equity based or regional or whatever, sometimes that's a bit more like Natalie's saying, of just sending out emails and hoping that somebody gets back to you.
Yeah, I think on that as well, with the BFI and BBC and various Film 4, other people that have got money for shorts, we've worked with all of them on features in the last 10 years. But I think, even though I know the people at the head of the BFI network and various people, it doesn't mean that they're going to give me money because they know me. I think it depends on the project. The project's not good enough, it's not going to get funded. And I 10, 15 years ago, I sent hundreds of emails, loads of calls to people that I really wanted to work with, mainly on the insurance side of things. But over time, it gets easier. The more people you know, the more people you meet. And I think things like LinkedIn and things like asking people that know somebody else just for a warm intro, I think it does take time. And I think it's not just an overnight thing that happens when you get those relationships and that network. But I think if it's a great project, I think, ultimately it should get found somewhere, and it will get financed if it's good enough, I think, really.
I was just going to say, I think thinking about networking and getting in front of people like from BFI or BBC or any of those kind of funders, it's as much about kind of building your network with other creatives and other producers rather than always trying to look upwards. Like, I think for me personally, my strongest relationships that yield the most results are with other producers. Like, they're the best resource I have, and like things just got a lot better for my career when I realized that, and I spent a lot more time really building strong relationships with other producers. And I think if you're a writer or a director, they're the people that you want to be talking to, like other creatives who also might have those relationships and would want to introduce you to anybody who would want to kind of help you with your career. So think kind of outwardly and around you, not just who's up the next rung of the ladder. That's such a good point. And actually also because a lot of times it's going to be your work which is the decider. So I think sometimes there may be cases where your absolute debut is financed by one of those places, but I think it's rare. I think realistically you need to go and you need to make something. I feel like the main lesson that I always learn time and time again in film is like, you can't do something until you've already proved you can do it, which is a stupid catch-22, but it does happen. And you have to, even if you make that like £200 short, have something which can prove that you are capable of doing it again with more money, I think is often really integral. And I'm not sure I agree that if the script is good enough, it will get the money. I don't think that's always the case. I think after you proved yourself with other things, absolutely. But I think often, in my experience, sometimes working with places like that, like often it's actually not even about the script. Like it's about who's writing it, who's directing it, and who's producing it. And so you could go in there with almost a blank piece of paper and say, this person who's done 2 award-winning shorts wants to make a feature, and they're not actually going to care about what the idea is because they believe in that person and that team. So in a sense, don't be demoralized if you think you've got a really good script but you can't find the money because it's your first thing. Like I think that's going to happen, and that's where you've got to be ingenious about asking for favors. What can you shoot in your own house? What can you shoot with the cheapest camera you can get your hands on? You know, like I think that's where you have to have a bit of that, like roll your sleeves up and just and prove yourself and make what you can first thing, because then once you've shown your ability, then it's much easier to get the bigger backers.
Yeah, I think as well, like
Absolutely.
On that point, like everybody would love for their first or second short to be like funded by one of those big funders. It's ideal, but you have to think about where you have to go after that. If your first short is BFI funded, you don't really have many other places to go for your next one. And if you're not quite ready for feature, how are you going to fill that gap? So I think having a good body of work before you approach some of the bigger guns in the industry is only going to serve you well. And the thing that I've found as well is everybody in the independent industry gets really excited when somebody comes out of nowhere, and they all want to get involved in something that's new or interesting. So if you can do everything kind of resourcefully away from those more risk-averse funders, by the time you come to them, you've got rid of as much risk as possible, and you're new and fresh and interesting. So
yeah, I also just want to echo Helen and Lucy and about the sideways networking and kind of like networking with your peers. I got better at funding applications, mainly sort of like micro grants from like, sometimes you just have to like keep an eye out on Twitter. Those things do pop up. With arts organizations, you can apply for a micro commission. And there are a few grants, I can name them, I'm happy to name them. They're called the Unity Theatre Trust, the Golson Colt Foundation. They are trusts that actually accepts applications from individuals and for films as well. And I just shared my applications, both successful and unsuccessful, with my peers. And I stole theirs to read, and I just got better and better at writing those cases for support. Yeah, so that's how I kind of went about it. And yeah, should we move to another question in the Q&A function? Is there a question that you wanted to answer?
There's been a couple of questions about moving from one sphere to another. And I think, I mean, you've got famous examples of playwrights who jump and make a big debut feature film, or that, you know, or a short that's funded by those. And I think that is quite common, but again, it's about having sort of raised a profile already in that first sphere. So like a lot of playwrights will probably find they can transition to TV writing without having written a short or written a spec TV script. Whereas if you only want to do screenwriting, then you're going to have to probably make a short film that showcases your writing and have some spec scripts either for TV or feature before. But I think if there's definitely, I mean, I feel like people are constantly searching for new talent. So if a play, even if it's at the Fringe or it's a Fringe theatre in London or something, like people will be looking for that stuff. So I think it's definitely a trodden path of moving from one area to the next.
Great. Yeah, absolutely. There's a question about, do you read pitches from underrepresented writers? Does it make a difference of making a short proof of concept to get a producer's attention?
I would say So if do a read from underrepresented writers, absolutely. Me personally, like I'm looking actively for people whose stories are not being told. Like that's what I want to see. Being underrepresented in itself is not enough. Like it has to actually be a good story. You know, there needs to be talent there. But those two things together, I think, is absolutely gold. Having a concept when approaching, sort of like a proof of concept when going to producers, I mean, it could be helpful. It depends on the quality of it. But ultimately, at least in the independent sphere, when you're approaching producers, they're not going to be the person that's giving you money to then make that thing. They're going to be with you on the journey to get to that point. And I don't know, as a producer, it would depend how much work you've done and what you're looking for from me. If I'm approached with a proof of concept and they're just looking for somebody to help raise finance, it kind of doesn't prick up my ears because that's not what interests me. I don't really want to be somebody's bank or taking out bank loans for somebody and then just being essentially a production coordinator. I want to be a collaborative team. And also there's then a lot to unpick. If you've made a proof of concept, you're pretty certain on what it is that you're making. And if there's some fundamental issues with that project, even if it is a really good project, it could be that then you're taking a whole step back and that whole proof of concept kind of thing might have been a not very good use of time and money.
There's nothing less appealing than someone coming to you being like, the script's perfect, I've got the actors, I just need someone to, and you're like, that's not, you don't understand fundamentally what a producer does if you're coming to me with that. And you would be surprised how many people do that. And I think when you're approaching people, realize that your producer is your partner the whole step of the way, and actually from a sort of practical point of view, they're the one running the whole show. And I think there has to be a sort of respect for what you're both going to do together, and that they're going to have creative as well as business and practical input, and that you can mold the project together. And also bearing, when you think about who you're approaching with what, think about where you are in your journey and where they are. Like if it's your debut feature and your debut short, and you've made nothing, and you're going to a producer who's made 5 Oscar-winning films, they're obviously not going to do that. But again, you'd be surprised, I think, how many people, I hear this from producer friends all the time, who they get approached by people on Twitter or anywhere, but like saying, can you do my debut short? And it's like, no, I'm not I've done my time doing that, I'm going to do something else now. And so that's where it comes to like looking alongside you, and that's what we have all done and are doing. And at each step there's certain people way above me that I wouldn't dream of approaching yet, and at each point you're thinking, who wants to take the next step with me? Because that's what it's about being a team and allowing you to both move forward.
Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's one question from Will saying, when fundraising for a short, do you always assume that the film will make a loss? How do shorts or even independent features make their money back, aside from being backed by a big distributor? Do Lucy or Helen or Paul feel happy to answer that?
With a short, you kind of are, because it's sort of impossible to, like, I mentioned to my friend, someone asked about this who did make money. That was because that was like a Sundance winning short. It was BAFTA nominated. It got picked up by like French TV. It got picked up by an airline company. It got so it managed to make its very small budget back, but that's so rare. So yes, most of the time you are selling the idea that they perhaps, sometimes you can include the budget in the development of the feature. If you know that short is a springboard to a feature idea, then you can say, okay, well, when and if we make the feature, you can get that money back as part of development spend. Or you're giving them the opportunity, which sounds silly, but you're giving the opportunity for them to invest again in the next thing. And that's where they will then see money back. But realistically, no, they're not going to see it back. And on features, it's about your strategy, and your sales estimates, which in the current climate kind of are just made up, because no one really knows what things look like in a minute. And it might be that you screen at a festival and Amazon or Netflix picks it up and boom, everybody's paid back. It might be that you're trying to sort of sell individual territories and TV rights and S4 and all that sort of stuff. So the feature side, it's a huge part of proving that you're going to make that money back. And in fact, that's like most of the battle of the fundraising is proving through your cast, through your sales estimates, through every sort of asset that the film has, that you can bring that money back in. But for sure, I don't think it's really, I've not heard it be a question.
Great, yeah. We've got 5 minutes left, just so thought I'd warn everyone. There are a few questions in the Q&A that are quite specific. For example, Gary, you asked about insurance. Paul would be very happy to
You're breaking up there, Natalie, but yeah, the question about insurance.
Email him directly to ask about that. I think that would be a better question to take offline. Like, so if you have a more specific, like
Well, I missed a lot of that.
Yeah, so Gary's just asking about would a disabled filmmaker have more issues trying to get insurance?
Really quick answer.
Would it not matter?
No.
Oh, sorry. Would a disabled filmmakers have more issues trying to get insurance?
So I don't know if it's my connection or
you
yours.
Find the question. Where's the question
Great.
here?
And, I think there is one quick one about
Paul, it's the top one from Gary. It says question about.
Natalie keeps breaking up, and I sort of forget to talk. I don't know if it's me or Natalie, but yeah. So Gary, really short answer is no. You shouldn't have any difficulties getting insurance. So there should be no issues, to be honest. I can talk more about that offline if you want, but yeah, there's considerations when you're shooting, but it shouldn't make any difference in terms of your application or eligibility to get insurance at all.
And I think there's a quick one about, does the panel feel it's easier to raise funds for drama or genre projects like sci-fi or horror? I can talk, I find it easiest to raise money for something I'm passionate about and a filmmaker that I actually personally click with, because it's so much hard work, and it's, I think that comes a little bit, but maybe the others will have a different answer.
Definitely you have to be passionate for yourself, for the enthusiasm, but in terms of whether it's like easier to find the money, I think in features at the minute, yes, drama is very, very hard unless you're set up with one of the public funders, and genre is definitely what people want. Like, everybody wants a horror, everybody wants a shark film, whatever. So I think if you have genre in that space, it's good, and your shorts will only be the calling card for you to make those features. But I don't know whether, I mean, most shorts you see that do well at festivals tend to be drama, as far as I've seen, but I don't know what that looks like at the minute.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a question from Annie Rowe asking, Helen, how did your friend make money from her short? Was it paywall to stream?
Oh, yeah, so she was the one who sold it to this channel in France and to an airline and various other places. So just people bought the rights. I mean, I've had distributors, well, I don't think you'd call them distributors. I've had people that have like optioned shorts to show or to sell, but I've not really ever seen much money back. Only small fees from, like, it screened at we had a short that screened at Reading and Leeds, which was quite random, but you know, there's sort of random places where you can get bits of cash, but hers was definitely an exception rather than the rule.
Great. I think there is a question saying, does making yourself known to funders meaning getting funding from them in the past? Does anyone want to jump in on that?
No, not necessarily. I think there are a lot of funders that are tracking talent, and particularly in places like the BFI, they're not reaching out to talent, they're waiting for the talent to come to them. And I think you'd be surprised how often they love somebody and have never been in contact with that person. You know, I'm working with a talent at the moment who's got a strong track record in shorts. As soon as I introduced them to the BFI, it was a case of let's get an application in as soon as possible, because they've really liked that talent for a long time, but they can't go out headhunting necessarily. So it doesn't necessarily mean being funded before. I think your work needs to speak for itself, and building those relationships, kind of networking with as many people, trying to get your name out there as much as possible. So when, you know, an application does fall on somebody's desk or they get an email from you, your name sticks whether you've been introduced before. There's this kind of association bias in the industry of, well, I've heard your name a few times before, somebody's mentioned you. It automatically has a little bit more weight when you then do approach somebody for funding, because I'm like, okay, well, I know some other people have got trust in you, or they want to work with you, so that makes them more likely to want to fund you, I guess.
Great. We've got like, we're coming on to 2 o'clock now, so if there's anyone whose questions we didn't manage to answer, there'll be a follow-up email with all the panelists' website, etc., so feel free to get in touch with them directly. I'm sorry about that, but it would be really, really good if we can all end on, if each one of you, Paul, Lucy and Helen, you wanted to tell the listeners about one piece of advice you would give them on the subject matter of fundraising. We might be really nice to end on that point. Yeah, who wants to go first?
I'd just say on the building a network side, just reach out to as many people as you can. Ask for referrals from friends and colleagues, and see what you can give to other people. Don't ask because you want a favour. Ask because maybe you can help. That's just a really short bit of advice from me.
Yeah, I think and my thing would be for fundraising specifically is you have to remember that your role at this point is fundamentally to be the cheerleader for that project, and you can't allow 50 no's to change your mind about how good that project is. I mean, it might come, there is occasionally a time you're like, okay, nobody wants this film, but for most of that journey, you've got to just keep knocking on those doors and be the person that's positive and enthusiastic and who believes in that project, because it only takes one yes often for everybody else to be like, oh no, I love it too. And it's sort of a bit of an industry of sheep, and if you can be that person to lead and say, no, it's brilliant, then others will hopefully follow.
Yeah, I guess I would kind of follow that with that idea, of being your own cheerleader, in that you have to have total conviction in what it is that you're doing. There's been quite a few questions on, is drama easier to raise money for than sci-fi? What a funder's looking for? And I think ultimately, as much as it feels like a non-answer, they're looking for you, what it is that you have to say. Like, if you're not a genre person, just because horror is big at the moment, don't try and retrofit who you are to make a horror because you think it's what people want to fund, because it never works. Like, you have to do the thing that is true to you, that is your voice, and the thing that you really want to make, and have real conviction and passion in that. Like, you can't second guess what people are looking for, because ultimately in the film industry, like, nobody really knows. Like, things take off for no reason whatsoever. Like, who would have known that something like Tiger King was going to go mental at the beginning of lockdown? Like, it's the weirdest thing ever. Like, you just don't know. So you have to really just believe in your own work and do what you think is the best thing for you.
Absolutely, yeah. I think mine would be always ask for feedback when you get a no. They might not always give it, but ask for it, and just keep in touch with those who said no to you just for that occasion, because most of the time it means no on that occasion. It's not no to you as a filmmaker, an artist, a producer, a person. Yeah, so that would be mine. But yeah, I think that's all what we've got time for today. Huge thank you so much to Paul, Lucy and Helen for giving up their time. I'm sure everyone listening, and I personally absolutely also really, really appreciates it. So for those thinking about relationships, tomorrow we're actually talking to an arts supporter who has been really generous and given to many crowdfunding campaigns before both theatre and film, and we'll be asking, his name is Alan Wilson. He's fantastic. I'll be asking him questions, and obviously you guys can also submit questions. We'll be asking him directly, so you get to actually hear from the other side of the table. So I'd strongly recommend anyone who's kind of still wanting to know exactly those relationships to join in tomorrow. But yeah, thank you so much, everybody. I think I'm gonna end the webinar here because the BFI network needs the Zoom back. But yeah, thank you so much, everybody. Thank you so much.